morning. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me along as an external speaker. Of course, I can't stand here with a question of why do bad things happen to good companies in front of a finance audience without talking about banking collapse. But the one I want to start with is maybe not the one you're thinking about. I want to start here. This is the Medici Bank, founded in 1397 in Italy, and it was, at the time, throughout the 15th century, the most powerful bank in the world. It was the bank of the Roman Catholic Church, and it had branches throughout Italy, as well as London, Lyon, Geneva, Avignon, and Bruges. And as I say, it was the most powerful bank in the world throughout the 15th century. And then in 1497, it collapsed. And it collapsed due to poor risk management, poor investment, lack of management oversight, and ultimately, a lack of liquidity. I don't know if that sounds familiar to any other banks you might have heard of in the last decade or so. It was, as far as I know, the first major corporate disaster. But of course, it wasn't the last. Companies like Enron, companies like Lehman Brothers, companies like AIG, ABN AMRO, and Nortel are just some of the names that have been added to a list that goes back over 500 years. So why do bad things happen to good companies? And what I mean by good is companies that before the event, before the collapse, before the disaster, we didn't think were bad. If I'd have asked you, you would have said, well, they're pretty good. But then after the public inquiries, the investigations, the news stories, suddenly we think they weren't so good. They were bad. Companies like BP, before Deepwater Horizon. Companies like Volkswagen, before the emissions scandal. And companies like Samsung, before the Note 7, and then the replacement of the Note 7. These companies didn't set out to fail, and in many ways they were perceived as good companies. And it's easy to think, well, what can you as an individual do to offset or to avoid a disaster like these? And it's tempting to think the answer is nothing. But actually, organizations are failing in less obvious ways each and every day. Recent research by the Association of Project Management found that 80% of projects fail to deliver on all of their stated objectives. So only 1 in 5 projects deliver on all of their objectives. Gallup found that 50% of companies fail to deliver on their brand promises. So half the time, we're building that trust that we're hearing of before the break with our investors. And the Project Management Institute found that for every $1,000 that is invested in a project, $112 is wasted. So that's 12% right off the bottom line. 12% that didn't need to be spent. This is about the day job. This isn't about the major corporate disasters. This is about people not being very good, being bad, if you like, at the day job. And this is the bad that I want to explore with you this morning. And I want to explore it for 2 reasons. The first reason is that this is about each and every one of us and how we turn up and how we work and how we deliver. But the second reason is, if you look at the disasters going back over 500 years, what you always find is that they're simply the end point of a whole range of failures, of missteps, of errors, of oversights, which add up to a big corporate disaster. So if you stop the small errors, you have a better chance of stopping the large disasters. So let's think about this for a minute. Why do we appear to be bad at this stuff? Organizations are full of good people just like you, who come in each day to do a good job. Nobody, well, few people, deliberately seek to not deliver the project objectives. Few people deliberately set out to not deliver on the brand promises. And few people seek to deliberately waste money on projects. And when those things do happen, we try really hard to get better. So we look at our processes and our systems and our organizations. Sometimes organizations reorganize themselves. I'm sure it's never happened here, but sometimes that happens. And we put more and more effort into these things. And that's the problem. I believe we're looking in the wrong place. Because the answer is not about process and systems, and it's not about trying harder. It's about attitude. It's about belief, and specifically it's about mindset. Okay? That's my proposition. So, let's just explore this for a minute. This is where you have to wake up, so I'm going to ask you a question, so I'll give you a little notice of that. I'm going to assume that most people here, if not everybody, can drive a car, drive a vehicle. And what I'd like you to do is rate yourself on a scale of 1, the worst driver in the world. Okay? You may know them. You may live with them. Who knows? 2, the best driver in the world, which is my dad, according to my dad. Okay? He's the best driver in the world. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd like to rate yourself out of 10. Okay? Now, we've heard already today how important trust is, so I'm going to trust you. I'd like you to hold that number in your head. And this is where I do my mind reading trick. Because I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up, but if I did, what I'd find, if you're normal, and I know you're finance people, but I reckon you're quite normal as well, 80% of you will have scored yourself 6 or higher. 80%. It means that 80% of people think they're above average. Now, I'm in a room of numerate people. Clearly, 80% of people can't be above average. Only 50% of people can be above average, you know? I mean, I'm an engineer, but even I can work that out. It's called illusionary superiority, which is a clumsy word and a clumsy way of saying we actually think we're better than most other people. And it's a very human belief. But it doesn't just exist in our marking of ourselves as drivers. The evidence shows that we overrate ourselves in terms of memory, judgment, communication, our ability to do our job, our professional abilities. Which means that organizations are full of people. Organizations are full of people who don't think they're the problem, alongside of a load of other people who don't think they're the problem either. And when you bring all these people together into something called an organization, it's no surprise that that organization thinks that it's good, because it's full of people who think they're good. And what happens is you all come together and you create this one massive illusionary superiority, which we might like to think of as brand or corporate arrogance. And it's that that gets in the way of us being better, because we already think we're good. So we look at the lessons from other organizations and we think that could never happen here, because we're good. We have nothing to learn. But that's only half the problem, because what happens with corporate superiority is we tend to then mix in urgency, because we think we're good. So let's go back to driving. If you imagine when you were learning to drive, okay? It's a horrible thought, I know, but learning to drive was actually quite difficult, yeah? You had to kind of concentrate, you had to change gear, and you had to accelerate, and you had to steer and look at the mirrors all at the same time, and it was like sensory overload. It was really difficult. But now, I'm sure we've all had the experience of arriving home, or arriving at work, or arriving somewhere that's a familiar journey and going, I don't remember getting here. I don't actually remember that journey, but clearly I'm here. So I've made it somehow. What's going on? What happens, of course, is it becomes familiar. It becomes second nature to us. It used to be quite difficult. Now it's easy. We do it all the time. Corporate arrogance means that actually we can go quicker, just as we can drive quicker. We don't have to think so much. So we can rely on, we can think about other things. We can do more things. We don't have to concentrate as hard. And this is a problem. But it might not be a problem you suffer from, okay? You guys might be immune from this automatic response. So let me just check. What I'd like you to look at is this figure, and I'd like you to count the number of triangles, okay? There's not that many, so I won't give you too long. Okay, can everybody see 2? Yeah. Anybody see 5? Anybody see more than 5? Yeah? 8, some people, maybe? 8? Yeah. Some people see 9 and 12 and 16. It's amazing how many triangles there are there. Now let's stop for a second. Definition of a triangle. Okay, so we're back in kindergarten now, learning shapes. Definition of a triangle? A shape with 3 sides. Yeah? How many of those shapes have got 3 sides? And the white one on the white background doesn't count. None of them. There's no triangles there. Now, one thing I did was plant triangle in your mind, because I said, how many triangles are there? But actually, this is how our brain works. We quickly see triangles, and we jump in and we see triangles, but there are no triangles. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel-winning psychologist, in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, calls this System 1 thinking. And System 1 thinking is the one that knows that 3 times 3 is 9. System 1 thinking is the one that has you see triangles where there are no triangles, because that's the kind of shape you'd expect to see triangles in. System 1 thinking is when we jump in and solve a problem because we've seen a problem like this one before. Only this one's different. System 1 thinking has extraordinary capabilities. It allows us to arrive at work safely, having not remembered driving there. But also, it catches us out. And it catches us out specifically and particularly at work. Particularly when we're busy, when there's no time to stop and think. So what's the answer? How do we overcome this System 1 thinking? Because this is at the source of most of the issues, most of the problems, most of the reasons organizations fail. There's an alternative. And the alternative is to engage System 2 thinking. Now, System 2 thinking is a system you had to use when you were learning to drive. It's conscious, it's deliberate, it's actually quite difficult. It's the one we use when I ask you not what 3 times 3, but what 17 times 23 is. You could probably work it out. I hope you could work it out without a spreadsheet. You up for that? I reckon you could, if I gave you a bit of paper. But it's going to be hard. Yeah? And System 2 thinking is the one that has us stop and think. And that's the key message, to stop and think. But of course, that's easier said than done. Because you have between 1/10 and 1/4 of a second to veto your System 1 thinking. 1/10 to 1/4 of a second to interrupt your thinking patterns. So how can we do that? How can we interrupt our natural instinct to jump in and see triangles or to answer the problem rather than stopping and thinking? There's the answer. Thank you, I'm finished. No, I'm not. I've got a little bit more to say. Pause. First and foremost, getting in the habit of hitting the pause button. Rather than jumping in, it's taking a second. Interrupting that veto, interrupting that System 1 thinking, vetoing that system one thinking and taking a breath and going, are there any triangles there? Is this really the same problem that we've faced before? Now, easy to say, difficult to do. This is the key area of practice for most organizations, trusting themselves to stop and think. But then what? So you've stopped, and you're now wanting to think. But how do you think? How do we get over our corporate arrogance and our individual illusionary superiority and actually get some insight? Well, the first thing you need to think about is pace. And I'm going to give you three P's in addition to pause. All good talks, leave you with a message, but they all begin with the same letter. So once you've paused, the first thing you need to think about is pace. This is Emperor Augustus, founder of the Roman Empire, conquered most of Europe and much of North Africa and some of Asia. And he was keen to tell his generals, he told his generals over and over again, festina lente, which means make haste slowly. So yes, there's urgency, but that doesn't mean we have to act quickly or with haste. Festina lente is about taking a moment and really trying to understand what is the urgency here. Whose urgency is it? And what's the impact of me jumping in rather than stopping and taking a breath and pausing? What is the real urgency here? Because I don't know about you, but my experience of organizations is that everything's urgent. It's just the degree to how urgent is it? And managing pace is critical if we are going to make better decisions. So we've managed pace. How might you do that? Be the person in the room who literally pulls back from the table. Be the person in the room who goes, okay, tell me more. Be the person in the room who encourages everybody else to festina lente. Because the reason I'm sharing these things with you is not just for you. Your impact as an individual, as an organization, as a function, will send ripples down through the organization if you practice these things. So that's pace. So we've paused, and the first thing we do is ask ourselves, what's the urgency? Then we think about position. One way that military commanders festina lente is to take themselves to higher ground, typically a hill overlooking a battlefield. They don't do that just so they don't get harmed. They do that because they then get the big picture. They position themselves where they can anticipate what might be happening on the battlefield, where their next move and their move after that might need to be. But to do that, you've got to pull yourself back from the firefight and take yourself to a position where you can see the bigger picture. This is HMS Belfast, moored on the River Thames in London. Some of you may have visited it. And there's two bridges. You'll see the two rows of windows about halfway up. The lower one is the captain's deck. Okay? This is the captain's deck. Captain's job is to look after the vessel. Yeah? So he or she, it would have been he when this was in commission, would sit there, and you can see surrounded by people, data, information, systems, all the equipment in front of him that tells him what's happening 1 second ago. Because the data's always 1 second behind or half a second behind. Okay? So this is how things were. The focus tends to be backward and inward. This is the captain's deck. Important job. This is the admiral's deck. One deck above. The admiral has got a radio and a compass. Because the admiral's job is to look out of the windows and see the big picture. To see what's happening around. To anticipate what they might need to do next. To see where the ship sits in relation to everything else. Now, HMS Belfast was decommissioned about 50 years ago, and modern command is different on warships, slightly different on warships. I'm not convinced we've caught up in business yet. I work with lots of organizations where the leaders are stuck on the captain's bridge, or actually stuck below decks, stoking the boilers or playing with the comm system, interfering. I mean, engaging and working. It's critical to withdraw yourself to a position where you can see the big picture. You can see the consequences, not of the immediate decisions, but the decisions beyond. You can see the consequence, how the decision you're about to make, having paused and managed pace, will play out for other people. So for you, what does this mean? This means about not just answering the problem that's in front of you, but putting it in the wider context of the overall organizational goal, the overall objective. Understanding how what you're about to do impacts other people. Thinking a few moves ahead. And it's really difficult to do that if you're on the battlefield, in the urgency, using System 1 thinking. So you need to find your equivalent of the captain's bridge or the hill, sorry, the admiral's bridge or the hill, to step back and see the big picture. So, pace, position. The third one is perspective. Once you've managed your pace, you understand the real urgency. Once you've put yourself in a position where you can see the big picture, what you then get is a fresh perspective. I gave you a fresh perspective on triangles earlier. Yeah? Now, if I was to come back in a few days and ask you that same question again, you'd sit there very smartly and say, there were no triangles there, Martin, because I'm very wise and very smart. I know what the definition of a triangle is. But if I was to come back in a few years' time, your memory might have faded. And you might get caught out again. Hopefully not, because this is so memorable you'll never forget it, but I'm prepared to concede, you might forget it. What perspective does is invite other people to collectively look at the issue. Jan Carlson, who turned around SAS Airlines in the 1980s from being a loss-making, heading towards bankruptcy organization to profit, and turned it at that time into one of the best airlines in the world, realized the importance of how small things matter, how your perspective on small things really matters. And Jan Carlson was fond of saying that coffee stains on the lap trays of our aircraft, coffee stains on the lap trays of our aircraft tell our customers that we don't do our engine maintenance properly. Coffee stains on our lap trays tell our customers we don't do our engine maintenance properly. And of course, what he's saying is what we tolerate in one area permissions lots of other things in lots of other areas. Now, it's easy to miss coffee stains when you're busy with your System 1 thinking and you're caught in the busyness. Pausing, thinking about pace, thinking about position, allows you to take a fresh perspective and get curious as to why there are coffee stains where there should be no coffee stains. Get curious as to why the way something is supposed to work isn't the way it's actually working. Because if you have a position of influence, it's important you do that. Not just because you need to be spotting these things, and not just because you want other people to be spotting these things and being curious and engaging other people, but because what you walk past sets the standard for everybody else. What you let go, if you have a position of responsibility, is the standard that everybody else then aspires to. So if you want to be a good organization, you need each and every one of your individuals to be at least good. And if you want to be a leader in your sector, you need all of your people to be better than the people everybody else has got. And this is about the standards we set. But perspective's also important because if you pause, manage pace, manage position, you get curious and you help everybody else do those things as well. So you become a positive agent in the organization that spreads a different kind of behavior, that moves away from the kind of behaviors that has good companies have bad things happen to them, to an organization that gets it right more of the time. So this isn't just about your behaviors, this is about the influence it has on others and helping them pause and manage their pace and their position and their perspective. So there you have it. Why do bad things happen to good companies? Principally because good companies are full of people who think they're good, who come together to create an organization that thinks it's good, and then is immediately exposed to corporate arrogance, where we believe that we are immune from bad things because bad things only happen to bad companies. And yet, in organizations across the world, 80% of projects fail to deliver their objectives. 50% of all organizations are not delivering on their brand promises. And out of every $1,000 spent on a project, 12% goes to waste. That would make a big contribution to your cash challenge if that 12% was going on to your bottom line, not your projects. It sounds simple, but of course, it's difficult because it's behavioral. There is no process, there is no system, there is no organizational reorg that's going to solve the problem. They might help, but it's your thinking which will be critical. If you do this, I'm afraid I can't guarantee that bad things won't happen. Bad things still happen, but there'll be fewer. And they won't become a habit. And if you do that, then you can keep telling yourself that you and your organization are really quite good. Thank you.